Good morning, Dan and Amy. Well, some matters with respect to national security to discuss, particularly in light of some of the components of Trump's contract with the American voter that he rolled out in Gettysburg over the weekend. But first, I just have to say, this was a geopolitical matter, too. The Philippines and their rather colorful authoritarian president, Duterte. Well, Josh Earnest... he's this grotesque Dickensian-named spokesbeing for the regime.
I'm familiar with his work. Yes.
He tried to make a funny over the weekend about the tension between the Philippines and the U.S. per President Rodrigo Duterte. The Filipino Trade Minister, Ramon Lopez, trying to kind of walk back in some of Duterte's rhetoric with respect to separation from the United States and alliance with China. And this is Josh Earnest doing his Bill Murray impersonation.
I've dubbed that person the Filipino Mike Pence.
Is he?
Are you being?
That was Josh Earnest. Because Mike Pence has to clean up for Donald Trump the way that Ramon Lopez, the trade minister of the Philippines, has to clean up for the seemingly unbalanced president of the Philippines, Duterte. So that was his funny. And it's also rather funny because I refer to Dmitry Peskov as the Russian Josh Earnest.
Oh, that's better. Yeah.
See, for those of you not familiar with your Soviet era spokesbeings that are present, Dmitry Peskov.
I'm sure you know them all.
Peskov is the spokesbeing for Vlad Putin. So that's it. But I guess if I have to explain the joke, it's not so good. So maybe I should dispense with jokes and go to KT McFarland, our friend and national security analyst for Fox News. KT, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Good morning.
Did you like my Peskov joke?
I thought it was pretty funny.
All right, thank you. If KT McFarland gives me the approval, the seal of approval, then I'm happy. That's all I need. So what about Trump's address at Gettysburg? Where he talked about a number of issues that are geopolitical economically to protect the American worker, mostly about trade agreements and labeling China a currency manipulator. But then he also talked a bit about his first 100 days that included eliminating the defense sequester and expanding military investment. He talked about his ending illegal. He provided, I should say, some more details about ending illegal immigration and building the wall. Anything in the remarks Trump made with respect to national security you found either redeeming or troublesome?
Yeah, I thought it was all great. And here's why. The United States has historically led from the front. And that doesn't necessarily mean we lead everybody into war. That's what the Obama administration and the far left would have you believe, that leading from the front just means going to war all the time. In fact, it means leading ideologically, economically, morally, politically, diplomatically, pick your way. It doesn't just mean leading militarily, but building up our defenses is a strong component of leading from the front. Not because you want to use the military force, but in fact the opposite, because you don't want to have to use the military force. That's what Reagan understood. And at first it sounds like, well, that's a conundrum. I mean, how does that make sense? You're going to build a really strong, expensive, high-tech military with a lot of capability, but then you're building it so you don't want to use it? Why are you wasting your money doing that? And the reason is it's much better, cheaper, et cetera, for the cause of peace to have a strong military and then use that as a deterrent force so nobody picks a fight with you. And then if somebody is dumb enough to pick a fight with you, then you have the military force to defeat them quickly, handily, and decisively. And that's what Reagan understood. Peace through strength didn't mean peace through going to war and beating the bad guys.
Right.
It didn't mean peace through subjugation or peace through conciliation. Didn't mean peace through conquest. It meant peace through strength, but the strength wasn't just military strength. It was all of the above. So I think Donald Trump is very squarely in that Reagan tradition. Now, it's very hard to hear it through all the cacophony of the mainstream media deciding he's the Antichrist and he's got to be destroyed at all costs. But in fact, his foreign policy is very Reaganist.
What about, he's grown strength in numbers through promising to build this border, the wall against the American-Mexican border. Will that be successful?
Well, Reagan
Is
had
it really
the thing,
needed?
It was actually, Amy, what Reagan did, and it was two things. In his second term, he was pushed about immigration, and so he said, "Okay, well, we're going to legalize everybody who's here, but we're going to build a wall so we don't have the problem to continue." And they gave amnesty to everybody who was here, but they never built the wall. And because his administration and Congress never authorized building the wall, I think is why we have the problem today. Nobody's saying no immigration, but what Trump has said before, or if he hasn't said, he should have said, is build a wall, but let it have a big door in it so that people can come in, but come in legally. The interesting thing about Mexico and their reaction to it is about 3 weeks ago, the Mexican president announced that they were going to build a wall, too,
Oh, really?
on their southern border.
Didn't hear that in the mainstream media.
Well, and so it's interesting. There's a piece by Peggy Noonan in the Wall Street Journal over the weekend where she calls Trump nuts, but she also says that his great historical role is to reveal to the Republican Party what half of its own base really thinks about the big issues. It's the party leaders didn't know. They wanted to indulge in denial that it was happening, but included in the denial is that party leaders have more or less accepted open borders and big trade deals. Half of the base doesn't want it. Donald Trump doesn't want it, and he intuited what was going on in the base. Do you share that assessment?
Yeah, I mean, look, I'm a populist. I'm a lifelong Republican, but I'm not a big government Republican. I'm a kind of rave Republican. I'm not a neocon who wants to go to war all the time. And so with policies, I'm very comfortable with Donald Trump, and I very much agree with what my friend Peggy Noonan has said, that the Republican Party has failed a lot of Republicans. And if you look at the middle class, for example, the middle class has been losing ground for the last 15 years under Republicans as well as Democrats. The middle class, the people are falling out of the bottom of the middle class, and people aren't advancing up into the middle class. And yet the middle class is the foundation of the land of opportunity. It's how we assimilate. It's the melting pot. It gives everybody an equal opportunity to live the American dream, and yet we're denying the American dream. So I think that there's an awful lot to what Peggy says, that the Republican Party has failed the non-Washington, non-elite, non-mainstream media, the outside the Beltway crowd, and the inside the Beltway crowd is stunned by this reaction because they thought everything was fine. Why? Because their lives are just fine. They're not feeling the pain of what has happened to the middle and lower middle of the country in the last 15 or 20 years. Now, if Peggy goes on to say in that article that the message is the right one, and if a sane Donald Trump had delivered the message, then he would be winning in a landslide. But she concludes that Donald Trump isn't sane, he's nuts, so therefore the message is getting thrown out with the messenger. But I believe that no matter what happens on November 8th, this national grassroots movement will still be there on November 9th. It's going to look for a new champion, but it's going to remain and I think grow.
KT McFarland, I've always wanted to ask you, what was your reaction when you heard the Billy Bush tape, when you heard that boorish rhetoric coming out of Donald Trump's? Did that affect your...
That was just disgusting. But it doesn't mean that anybody who supports Donald Trump is therefore a racist, a bigot, a groper, whatever. I think you have to sort of separate out and condemn what he said. I'm a woman who was at the early days of the women's movement, and I'm the mother of 2 daughters. And so I didn't like what he had to say. I thought it was terrible. I thought he should have apologized more than he did, although he did apologize. On the other hand, I'm separating that out from the policies because for the same way that if the people who like Hillary Clinton, would you be asked, would you support what Hillary Clinton did when her husband was having affairs? I just think you have to separate it out and not say that because you like the policies of strong immigration, a strong national defense, a pro-growth economy, that somehow you're also in favor of discriminating against and fat-shaming, et cetera, women.
Yeah, right. I mean, you're responsible for everything that somebody you're voting for has ever done.
Responsible for everything my husband says.
Right. Well, so to that, moving beyond character to policy, Ross Douthat in the New York Times has an interesting piece as well, talking about the dangers of Hillary Clinton, since so much time has been spent on the dangers of a Donald Trump presidency. And one of the things he said, I think Donald Trump has said from time to time during the campaign, I think he should have made it more central, But he talks about every crisis that's come upon the West in the last 15 years has its root in this establishmentarian type of folly and thinking inside the Beltway. And he writes, indeed, what is distinctive about Hillary, more so than even Bush or Obama, is how few examples there are of her ever breaking with elite consensus on matters of statecraft. And he goes through Iraq and Russia and Merkel and so forth. And that seems to me an argument that Trump should have made more central when it came to discussions of national security and geopolitics, that she is just kind of part of the groupthink crowd inside the Beltway that has gotten us into all of these messes.
Yeah, I think you're right. You and I have talked about this before, Dan, in many forums. I think the Republican Party and the Democrat Party have, for the last 15 years in foreign policy, failed the country. We've had two terrible foreign policy presidents back to back, and we're about to get a third if Hillary Clinton wins, because she will continue the legacy of Barack Obama, the confused, lead from the back, but somehow think you're setting the rules. It's also this notion of globalism, that we need a rules-based international order because all of our problems transcend national borders, and anyway, the major problem is global warming. It's this group think that says we need these global rules. Oh, and by the way, the rest of you, you're not smart enough to figure out what these rules should be, so we've got to govern for you, because after all, the average American doesn't know enough, isn't smart enough, is a low information voter, so we elites are the only ones who can make the decisions, and we plan to make the decisions not just for America, but for the world. Now, the problem with that is, besides the fact that it's snobby and snarky, is that the rest of the world, the Russians, the Chinese, the Iranians, they don't want to play by some rules-based international order. They want to break that order. They want to play by their own rules. And that is, I think, if Hillary Clinton wins, that's the world we're going to see for the next 4 years.
Certainly part of the closing argument. KT McFarland, Fox News national security analyst. Thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
Bye.
Bye-bye. And she joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.